Dr. Jack, how are you? And you're saying this is a month, it's Mental Health Awareness Month? I did not know that.
It's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And of course, no one knows about it. That's the point. It also coincides with Gay Pride Month. Um, and of course, not surprising, men always take the back seat to everything else. As long as men aren't saying anything, leave them alone. That's hey, maybe I'm cynical, but and guys, to our fault, we ask for it. We don't want to be bothered. We kind of like being alone in a lot of ways. There's a comedian, he was off. He's like, men, want you to be around. We want to be alone, but we don't want to be by ourselves, kind of thing. So, I think men do like that independence, that, leave us alone, um, until they don't. And that's the problem. It's like everything's fine. I'm fine by myself. I'm doing fine. And guys like that. And I think everybody else in our lives likes when we're taking care of ourselves. But when the stuff hits the fan and then we start to crumble or we start to second guess or we start to think, that's our biggest problem. Guys are better off, I think. These are all my opinions. I think guys are better off when they're doing, when you're focused, when you're in that warrior mode, when you're focused, you're driven, you're a warrior, you're a hunter. That's a men's mindset is that focus. When that focus gets lost from life, from stress, from finances, from business, from work, and you start rethinking, I think that's where men get lost. They lose their routine. And I think that is a lot of the issues with men's health. And then they get distracted by substances, by all sorts of, the evils of the world. They get stuck in situations and they get themselves into trouble, or the world gets them into trouble. So when I started the men's clinic, I wanted to incorporate all those things. And we spoke about this the first time we met. My mental health issues were centered around my adoption, and a lot of it I didn't even know. I was completely unaware of it. And that led to me writing the book. So as I wrote the book Recycled, which was basically my therapy, and it's how I got through those issues. And it worked out great. My relationship with my parents is good. My relationship with my all my other families are good. But when I was going through the men's clinic, the men's movement idea, just started thinking about what is it that men need to focus on that seem to be common issues. So when I started the Instagram page, I started with 10 posts, which I tried to use as the defining um, rules for this magical ultimate male. Who is the ultimate male? What is the ultimate male? I mean, this is an ideal that is unachievable. So anyone thinks you're going to achieve this ultimate male status, you will not. You will not achieve the ultimate male status. But that shouldn't stop you from trying. And I think that's the point to these rules. And it kind of gives a framework and a mindset that helps you approximate that ultimate male. But you got to realize that you will fail about it. So I want to go through today, in honor of Men's Mental Health Month, I want to go through the ultimate male Jack Rocco 10 rules for success, 10 ideals to strive for.
All
And the
right.
first issue, all right, you ready for this, Neil? You are ready. Okay, so um, like most people, both men and women, the battle of the sexes, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. I thought the number one rule that men have issues with is women. And in my opinion, in my experience, rule number one to the Ultimate Men's Clinic is women choose, men compete. And if you think about that, there's plenty of evidence in the literature, and there's a great book that I always refer to is Robert Wright's book called The Moral Animal, and it's about evolutionary psychology, how we have all evolved not just physically with our appearance, with our eye color, our hair color, our height, and our weight, but also our mindset, our strategies, our psychologic strategies. And men and women both have very different strategies. You know, a lot of this goes back to the fact that, you know, men have an infinite number of sperm cells with which to procreate. You know, procreation is a huge part of all of our lives. And women have one egg per month. They have a limited supply of eggs. And if a woman um, gets pregnant, her investment in that egg and in that child is immense. You know, it's the way it is. And I said, and we're going back evolutionary millions of years. You know, that a man can go around, you know, a breeder buck can go around and have multiple, you know, have a harem of women and spread his genes. Whereas women have to be selective. So that selective, you know, that sexual preference and sexual selectivity primarily comes from the women. So that's why I wrote number one, women choose and men compete for that. You know, if you look at the bird world, you know, who's got the biggest feathers, who does the best dance, all those things. So that's rule number one of the ultimate man. You have to realize that, you know, if you're looking for a mate, you're competing for their attention. But ultimately the women decide. Rule number two to the ultimate men's clinic is you will lose. You know, a part of being a man includes defeat. You will lose. You know, this isn't all about victory. We love when we hit victory, but you will lose. But that doesn't mean that you've lost as long as you don't quit. You know, and you know, I got a great story of my son. You know, my son is a tremendous wrestler, and his eighth grade year, he was going for his two-time championship, and he ended up um, in the finals, you know, undefeated season, and he ends up and he had a loss in the finals to another kid, and he got pinned in the second period. He walked, you know, he stood up, he went to the middle of the mat, took off his ankle bracelet, shook the kid's hand, raised the other kid's hand. My son went to the other coach, shook the other coach's hand, went back to his own coach and said, "Now I know what I have to work on for next year." And he freaking had me bawling. You know, it's just like that to me, you know, the way he lost was so inspiring to me. And, you know, I got him afterwards. I'm like, dude, you know, I'm always proud of you no matter what. But now today, the way you lost, I'm prouder of you than I ever could be have you won. So you will lose. You will lose in life. You'll lose in business. You'll lose everywhere in life. But don't quit. You know, as long as you don't quit, you haven't lost. Which brings us to rule number three. Rule number three for the ultimate man: the ultimate man never quits. You don't quit. You can change course, you don't quit. And that to me, that rule for me comes from all those brothers that I've lost over the years. I think we all have those brothers that we lost. And you can't talk about Men's Mental Health Month without talking about the suicide rate. 80% of all suicides are from men. And there are, you know, I'm not going to quote the numbers because some of the numbers I heard are staggering and I don't have confirmation on them, but the number of men who quit, who lose their life to life, you know, they have had enough. And but when men do it, when men commit suicide, men commit suicide. It's not a cry for help. They do it the way that they live life, and they do it dramatically. And when I was in Japan, I mean, I spent 4 years in Japan in the service, and the whole idea of honor amongst men, you know, they call it harikiri. You know, we say hari kari, you know, the American version when the samurai would slice their abdomen. And, you know, that word means cutting the abdomen. You know, the samurai soldiers would cut their abdomen in a dramatic way if they lost in battle to just to save face. So men, it's a shame, but you know, men struggle, and in this world, you know, men struggle. So don't quit. You know, call a friend, go to go to a clinic, go to a doctor, go to a friend, do what you got to do, but the ultimate man does not quit. Rule number four. I got this one also from my experience in the military. When I was in the Air Force, I learned that the Air Force's motto was Semper Gumby. And with that's kind of a play on the Marines. You know, the Marines was Semper Fi, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, always true. Um, we were told in our officer training that the Air Force's motto was Semper Gumby, which meant always flexible. And the point was that, we were taught and told that um, in air battles and in war, that flexibility really is the key to power. That sometimes you can go this way, but if you're always doing this, you got to change your plays up. If you've been passing, then you got to go to a run. But being flexible and assessing your enemy, countering your enemy, and being flexible and changing plans, you don't quit, but you stay flexible, you change your plans. You think maybe I need another job, maybe I need to go to school, maybe I need to do something else. Um, so flexibility is the key to power. You can't keep, same play, same play, same play, same play. You got to break it up a little bit. You got to change your life sometimes. Sometimes you got to be firm and hard and solid and masculine. Sometimes you got to be a little feminine. You got to be a little on your softer side. And we got into a lot of that with John Sanders on that podcast. Not every strategy, not every method of success is going to succeed in every environment. So sometimes you need to change. You need to change the environment. You need to change to the personnel you're working with. You need to change to the day, the time. Flexibility is key. So don't be so rigid in your thinking and your strategies as the ultimate man. You need to have many facets. Rule number 5, I think, is another issue that is very important, and that's the issue of violence. That one of the complaints or issues with women is male violence, and that is a huge issue. And the ultimate man is not violent. Being violent is not being flexible. Being violent it's brutal. It's the method of last resort. And in our world nowadays, with the wars and the political fighting and the red state, blue state, the conflict, that whether it's media or politics or whoever it is that brings us to these extremes, I find that most people live in the middle. Most people that I run into, you live in the middle. Or if you talk to someone, I mean, I've had conversations with Iraqis in Japan or Russians in Cleveland. You name it. If you meet a person, it doesn't matter who they are. Um, when I spent my time in Japan, back in World War II, the Japanese were our enemy. They were horrible. But anytime you meet someone, whether they be Muslim, Christian, Hindu, when you meet them face to face and you talk to them, most people have very similar, there's always common ground somewhere, you know. But if you've resorted to violence, that just shows a closed-minded mentality that you're not thinking, what is the best route for this conflict resolution? Violence is the last resort, and the ultimate man is not violent. So that's rule number 5, and I think that's an important one. Rule number 6, this speaks to ego. I think rule number 6 speaks to ego. It's great to be confident, it's great to be assertive, it's great to be all those things, but you are not perfect. You are not the ultimate man. You are not your best. You are not in your best shape. You're not in your best mental health. You're not in your best finances. There's always room for improvement. And the other part of Rule 5 is, and they are watching. The people in our lives, our family, our friends, our loved ones, our coworkers, especially if you're in a leadership position, they're watching you. They know that you're not your best. And showing that humility and showing that humbleness that you do need improvement, I think is a strength. Hey, this is the first time I'm going through life. It's the first time you're going through life, Neil. And each day, each year, each circumstance is new, and you've never done this before, and the people you're doing it with have never done it before. So give yourself some grace. You're not perfect, and that is fine. Your ego should be soft in that regard, and you should realize that, hey, I got I learn every day. I lose every day. I'm wrong every day. But you know what? As long as you're in the fight, it's that old Teddy Roosevelt speech, the man in the arena. It's not the critic that counts. And if you haven't read that speech, The Man in the Arena. It's a fantastic. It's about being, you're fighting. You're going to lose. You're going to suffer you're going to suffer your battle injuries, but you're going to come back. And you need to be strong and you need to be humble, because you're not your best. There's always room for improvement. Um, Rule number 7. Another very important one. This is, when we talk about suicide, I think you have to include your active suicides, and you have to include what I consider passive suicides, which is substances. Men kill themselves passively through substances. They know they're doing it. They know they're drinking too much. They know they shouldn't be engaging in some of the activities that they engage in that are addictive. Um, but they do it. They do it. They get caught in it. So the ultimate man, he frees himself from substances, from addictions, from things that don't serve his purpose. The ultimate man needs to be aware, needs to be flexible. So all these rules are interactive. He needs to be flexible and realize, hey, this is an addiction. Whether it be food, whether it be alcohol, whether it be pornography, whatever it is, there are behaviors that are counterproductive to your ultimate self. So you need to get away from those as best you can. Sometimes they're social. The drinking is a very social. I mean, I grew up in an Italian family. There was always bottles of wine, um, but I never saw my grandfather drunk or out of control. So there's a difference between enjoying, imbibing, but recognizing that, hey, this is becoming a problem. This isn't a social drinking thing. This is becoming a problem. My health is suffering. My family is suffering. My job is suffering. You need to control those substances. And the ultimate man eliminates or removes or controls those addictions. Number 8, the ultimate man takes care of himself. That is the thing that I think guys have the hardest problem with. The ultimate man is always feels they need to give. You're giving 110%, 120%. That's what we're taught from the beginning. Pay attention to your teammates, um, lift someone up, bring someone up. But you know what? You can't, as they say in the plane, put your mask on before you help others. If you are not in good shape, or if you are not in your ultimate physical state, your ultimate mental state, your ultimate financial state, you can't help anyone else. So you don't want to be the one that's dragging people down. So the ultimate man focuses on himself, takes care of their health, all these things. Once again, these are all tied. Takes care of their substances abuse, takes care of their bad relationships, their friendships that are toxic or counterproductive. So the ultimate man is selfish. And there's nothing wrong with that. The ultimate man takes care of himself first, because you can't take care of anyone else unless you take care of yourself. And I think that is the biggest, that is one that I see men often, especially those guys that you love, those guys that you love, those guys who give 100% and always do what they want to, always do what they need to do for everyone else. When they need to take care of themselves, they need to take care of themselves. And that is your responsibility to take care of yourself when you need help, and to ask for help, to go to a physician, to go to a friend, to go to a family member, to go to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, to get that help that you need. And that's what men's mental health is about. It's about breaking down those stigmas. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. I always say, it's even a Lamborghini needs an oil change now and then. You might be a Lamborghini, you might be a fast driving red sports car, but you still need to take care of those basic necessities that will help you in the long run. Where are we now? Number 9. Number 9 is another big one. Number 9 is, I love number 9 because, as we're number 8 is the selfish one, number 9 is the spiritual one. You got to have faith in something that's bigger than you. That could be God, that could be country, that could be philosophy, it could be science. You have to have a belief. You have to have a core fundamental belief that drives you every day. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. You need to have those beliefs in the system. in the system that's bigger than you, in the universe, in God, in whatever it is. I'm not telling you what God do. The battles between religion. That's another thing that is often a stumbling block to a lot of people. You fight over religion and politics, and you know you have to respect that someone else's belief is also a core belief. And if you go back to, if you sit and you listen, when I was in Japan, I went to a Shinto temple. I went to a Buddhist, I was in Thailand, and I literally, learned how to meditate from a Buddhist monk in the basement of a Bangkok Wat,
Right.
Buddhist Wat. And when you're sitting there in the basement or you're having lunch, we had a tremendous lunch the with the church, and um, we end up talking about everything. It's the same life. They might have been Buddhists, they might have been monks, but
Right.
they were people first. And I said, once you get into politics and religion, you find out there's more common ground and be strong enough and flexible enough to find that. But you need to have your core beliefs. These are what work for me. Christianity works for me. Buddhism works for me. Whatever it is that works for you, that core belief. Science can be a religion
Yep.
if you believe in science. And the final one, the final rule to being the ultimate man is that tomorrow will be better when you're the ultimate man. There is hope. You stay by these rules, you follow these rules, you go through them one by one. You start at one, you start at two, you go to three, you go to four. You follow these rules. These rules are your Swiss Army knife. Sometimes you need flexibility, sometimes you need standards. Sometimes, you need a different blade for each opportunity, each encounter, each experience that you go through in life. So this is an attempt to boil down what it is to be the ultimate man. And of course, it's not all inclusive, and these are, my
Yeah.
random thoughts, but I think it's a starting point. It's something that we can all talk about, that if you're going to be a part of the ultimate men's movement, we've got 10 rules. And I don't think you can argue with them. You can debate over the nuances of them, but
Okay.
I think having a standard, having a common ground from which we can move forward, I think is a good starting point.
All right. Go to theultimatemensclinic.com. It's in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and you can contact Dr. Jack. And if you're wanting testosterone or different things, you can also work with him online. So reach out to him. And because I got some huge feedback, from YouTube about the testosterone. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dr. Jack. All right. That was a special simulcast of the Neil Haley Show and the Ultimate Men's Movement.